After the ceremony, Leona sat in her office at the center, reflecting on how far they had come. The once overwhelmed center was now a thriving hub of support, its future secure. William knocked on the door, stepping inside with a familiar smirk. "You ready for the next project?" Leona raised an eyebrow. "You don't waste time, do you?" "Not when we're on a roll," William replied. "So, what do you say? Are you in?" Leona smiled, standing to shake his hand. "I'm in." As they left the office together, the sun setting behind them, it was clear that their work and their partnership was only just beginning. Months after the Foundation's successful launch, William found himself at the groundbreaking ceremony of a new housing project in a struggling nearby neighborhood. The project was one of the Foundation's first major initiatives, inspired by lessons learned from Leona's community. Leona stood beside him, clipboard in hand, her presence now integral to the Foundation's work. "This neighborhood has potential," she said, scanning the area. "It just needs the right kind of attention." William nodded, watching children play in the distance. "Let's give it to them." Back at the Foundation's headquarters, tensions arose during a strategy meeting. Leona advocated for prioritizing grassroots initiatives, while a board member pushed for partnerships with big-name corporations. "We can't sell out to the highest bidder," Leona argued. "These communities need authentic support, not just a PR stunt." William stepped in, his tone measured. "Our focus is trust and real change. If a partnership doesn't align with that, it's not worth pursuing." The board member reluctantly agreed, but the exchange highlighted the delicate balance of staying true to their mission while navigating corporate pressures. One evening, William visited Leona at the center. She was unusually quiet, her typical energy subdued. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. She hesitated before answering. "The funding for some of our older programs is drying up. I'm worried about keeping them running." William frowned. "We'll find a way. The Foundation exists for moments like this. Let's reallocate resources or raise more funds, whatever it takes." Leona looked at him, her gratitude evident. "Thank you. I don't think I've ever had someone in my corner like this before." "You're not alone in this," William replied. News of the Foundation's work began to spread, inspiring other communities to organize and advocate for their needs. At a regional summit, William and Leona were invited to share their story. Leona's speech captivated the audience. Change doesn't happen because of one person or one action. It happens when people come together, challenge the status quo, and refuse to give up. When William spoke, his words carried the weight of his transformation. "I've learned that leadership isn't about control, it's about empowering others. That's the kind of legacy I want Sterling Industries and this foundation to leave behind." One day, a surprise visitor arrived at the center, William's estranged father, Edward Sterling. Edward had seen the Foundation's success in the news and wanted to reconcile with his son. "I wasn't the father you needed," Edward admitted, "but I'd like to be part of what you're building now." William's initial response was guarded, but Leona encouraged him to listen. "People can change," she said softly. "You're living proof of that." After a heartfelt conversation, William and Edward agreed to take things one step at a time. Leona proposed an ambitious new initiative, a mentorship program pairing successful professionals with young people in underserved communities. "It's not just about resources," she explained to the Foundation's team. "It's about showing these kids that someone believes in them." The program quickly gained traction, with volunteers signing up from diverse industries. William himself mentored a teenager named Marcus, whose curiosity and drive reminded him of his younger self. Months later, a crisis threatened one of the Foundation's flagship projects. A legal dispute over land ownership stalled construction, leaving families in limbo. William and Leona worked tirelessly to mediate, using every connection and resource they had. When a resolution was finally reached, the project moved forward, and the families affected expressed their heartfelt gratitude. "That was too close for comfort," William admitted afterward. "But we made it," Leona replied. "And that's what matters." As the Foundation celebrated its one-year anniversary, William and Leona reflected on how far they had come. The community center was thriving, new projects were underway, and lives were being transformed. "What's next?" William asked as they stood on the balcony of the Foundation's new office. Leona smiled. "Whatever challenges come our way, we'll face them head-on." William extended his hand, and she shook it firmly, their partnership stronger than ever. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, a fitting symbol of the hope and promise their work continued to bring. The bell above the diner's door jingled as William Sterling stepped inside, his leather shoes clicking against the faded tile floor. He paused in the entrance, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room with barely concealed disdain. The small-town diner was a far cry from the luxury he was used to. The faded red booths were filled with chattering customers, the air thick with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. "Why here, Bradley?" he muttered to his assistant, who followed closely behind, clutching a tablet. "This place looks unsanitary." Bradley cleared his throat awkwardly. "It's the only spot open this late, sir." William's lips tightened, and he strode toward a booth in the far corner. A waitress approached, her notepad in hand. Her smile warmed despite the long night. "Good evening," she greeted brightly. "What can I get for you?" William barely glanced at her. "Coffee, black, and whatever's fastest." Leona Carter's smile faltered for the briefest moment before she regained her composure. She had dealt with rude customers before, and she wouldn't let this one get under her skin. "Of course, sir. I'll be right back." As she walked toward the counter, Bradley glanced nervously at William. "Maybe we could keep this quick, sir. You're tired." "No," William snapped, tapping his fingers impatiently on the table. "I'm irritated. This place reeks of desperation." Leona returned moments later with their drinks and a plate of warm bread. "Here's your coffee, sir. Anything else?" William looked up briefly, his gaze cold and dismissive. "I assume this is drinkable." Leona's stomach tightened, but her smile stayed fixed. "Freshly brewed, sir. If there's a problem, let me know." As she placed the plate down, William leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "Is this standard service here? Dropping food without a word?" Leona met his gaze calmly, her voice level. "I believe you asked to be left alone, sir." Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his seat, shooting Leona an apologetic look. William's lips thinned, but he said nothing, waving her off. In the kitchen, the tension in Leona's shoulders finally eased. She leaned against the counter, exhaling a long breath. "Rough night?" Maria, a fellow waitress, asked, eyeing her friend. "Table 5, Leona replied, shaking her head. "Some high and mighty suit who acts like he's allergic to kindness." Maria smirked. "Rich people. They come in here thinking they're slumming it, but they're the worst." Leona laughed softly, though the encounter still sat heavy in her chest. "He doesn't even know my name, but he's already decided I'm beneath him." Maria shrugged. "Forget him. They're just passing through." Leona nodded, pushing herself off the counter. "You're right. Time to get back out there." The car was silent as Bradley drove William back to his hotel. The night sky was dark, the city lights a faint glow in the distance. "That was a waste of time," William muttered, loosening his tie. "That diner. The service, everything about it was subpar." Bradley hesitated, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "I thought the waitress was quite good, sir. Very professional." William scoffed. "Professional? Hardly. People like her should stick to flipping burgers and leave real work to those who matter." Bradley's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The tension in the car was palpable as William gazed out the window, his thoughts far from the small diner and the waitress he had so easily dismissed. As the night dragged on, the diner grew quieter, with only a handful of customers lingering in the booths. Leona took a moment to wipe down the counter, her mind replaying the sharp remarks from table 5. She glanced over and noticed that the man, now alone, seemed deep in thought, his assistant having stepped out to take a call. Sighing, Leona poured a fresh cup of coffee and approached the table again. "Here's a refill," she said softly, placing the cup in front of him. William glanced up, his expression guarded. "I didn't ask for more." "It's on the house," Leona replied, her tone neutral but kind. "Long night, huh?" William raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. Instead, he picked up the cup, his fingers brushing the ceramic. For a brief moment, he seemed almost human, but just as quickly, his walls went back up. "Thanks," he muttered curtly, and Leona walked away, her lips pressing into a faint, knowing smile. Outside the diner, Bradley stood in the cold night air, his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking to his wife, trying to explain why he was late again. "Yeah, it's another one of his late-night ideas," Bradley said, frustration evident in his voice. "You know how it is with him. Everything's beneath him. People, places." He glanced back through the window, watching as Leona busied herself clearing tables. "But there's this waitress inside. She's got more class in her little finger than he does in his whole body." His wife laughed softly on the other end. "Careful, Brad. Sounds like you're picking sides." Bradley sighed. "Maybe I am." It was nearly midnight when the last customers left. Leona began stacking chairs on the tables, the dull ache in her feet a familiar companion at this hour. William lingered at his booth, staring at his phone, seemingly oblivious to the closing time. "Sir," Leona called gently, approaching him, "we're closing for the night." William looked up, startled as if realizing for the first time how late it was. He stood, smoothing his jacket. "Of course." As he walked toward the door, he paused, his gaze briefly meeting Leona's. "You work hard." Leona blinked, caught off guard by the comment. "I try." He nodded stiffly, then turned and left without another word. Leona watched him go, her thoughts a mix of irritation and curiosity. The next morning, Leona sat at her kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee while the sun streamed through the window. Her younger brother, Malcolm, shuffled into the kitchen, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Late night?" he asked, grabbing a piece of toast. "Always," Leona replied, smiling faintly, "but it pays the bills." Malcolm sat across from her, his expression serious. "You ever think about doing something else?" "You're smart, Leona. You don't have to stay at that diner forever." Leona chuckled softly. "One step at a time, Malcolm. First, we get you through school." As her brother left for class, Leona stared at her empty coffee cup, her mind drifting back to the man from the diner. Something about his presence lingered, though she couldn't quite place why. She shook her head, brushing the thought away. "Just another customer," she murmured to herself, heading out the door to start another long shift. In William Sterling's sleek, minimalist office, chaos reigned. His assistant Bradley stood by the window, looking tense, while members of William's boardroom team crowded the large glass table. On the center screen was a headline, "Billionaire's Project Under Fire. Displacement Scandal Rocks Sterling Industries." William rubbed his temples as the board members spoke over each other. "This is a PR disaster," one woman said. "People are protesting outside your properties." Another chimed in. "The press is already labeling you as heartless. We need to control the narrative." Bradley cleared his throat. "Sir, the protesters are from the community affected by the land development project. We should reach out to them." William looked up sharply. "Why should I entertain people who don't understand how business works?" The room fell silent. The board chair leaned forward. "You don't have a choice, William. Public sentiment matters. You need to visit the community center and make amends." At the community center, Leona was busy organizing supplies for a food drive. She worked efficiently, chatting with volunteers as she moved between tables. Maria entered with a clipboard, her expression exasperated. "Leona, did you hear about this?" Leona paused, glancing over. "What now?" Maria held up her phone, displaying the news about William Sterling's impending visit. "Apparently, he's coming here to smooth things over." Leona frowned. "The billionaire who thinks the world revolves around him? What's he doing in our neighborhood?" "Damage control," Maria said flatly. "He's been all over the news for kicking people out of their homes for some luxury complex." Leona shook her head in disbelief. "Great. Just what we need. Another photo op with someone who doesn't care." A sleek black car pulled up outside the community center. Protesters gathered nearby shouted slogans, holding signs that read, Stop the greed, and homes over profit. William stepped out, flanked by Bradley and a small security team. Inside, the center's bustling activity quieted as people noticed him enter. His tailored suit and aloof demeanor made him stand out among the casually dressed volunteers. Leona, handing out bags of donated food, froze when she saw him. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered under her breath. Maria nudged her. "Guess who's back?" William scanned the room, his gaze eventually landing on Leona. Recognition flickered in his eyes, and his jaw tightened. Leona straightened her posture, her voice calm but cutting. "Welcome to the real world, Mr. Sterling. What brings you here?" William's tone was clipped. "I'm here to listen to your community's concerns." "Let's see if you actually hear them," Leona shot back. The community center's director, Mr. Hargrove, led William to a meeting room where representatives of the affected families waited. Leona was among them, sitting near the front with her arms crossed. "Mr. Sterling," Mr. Hargrove began, "these are the people impacted by your project. They've lost homes, businesses, and stability." William's expression remained cold. "I'm here to offer solutions." Leona couldn't hold back. Solutions? Or excuses? The room murmured in agreement. William's gaze snapped to her. "And you are?" "Leona Carter," she said firmly. "One of many people tired of being ignored by people like you." Bradley shifted uncomfortably behind William, his eyes darting between the two. William's voice was sharp. "If you have something constructive to say, Miss Carter, I'm listening." Leona leaned forward, her tone steady. "How about starting with an apology?" The tension from the meeting spilled into the next part of the day. To soften his image, William reluctantly agreed to volunteer at the soup kitchen run by the center. Leona was assigned to supervise him. William rolled up his sleeves begrudgingly. "This is ridiculous." Leona handed him a ladle, her expression neutral. "We all do our part here, even billionaires." As they served meals, William struggled to keep up with the line. He spilled soup on the counter, earning disapproving looks from the other volunteers. Leona stepped in, taking over with practiced efficiency. "You're not used to real work, are you?" she said quietly, her tone teasing but pointed. William shot her a glare. "I'm here, aren't I?" "Barely," she replied. As the soup kitchen line dwindled, William noticed a young boy thanking Leona for his meal. She crouched down, chatting with him warmly before sending him off with a smile. William watched, his expression unreadable. "You seem to know everyone here." Leona glanced at him. "This is my community. I care about these people." William hesitated, then asked, "Why do you care so much?" Leona straightened, her voice calm but firm. "Because someone has to. People like you have the resources to help but don't. So the rest of us step up." For once, William didn't have a retort. Later that evening, as the center emptied, William and Leona found themselves alone in the main hall. Leona was packing supplies while William checked his phone. "You don't like me very much, do you?" William asked suddenly. Leona paused, her hand stilling. "I don't like what you stand for." "And what do I stand for?" "Exploitation, greed, arrogance," Leona said bluntly. "You think people like me are beneath you." William's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about me." Leona's voice softened but remained steady. "You're right, but what you've shown me so far doesn't give me much to admire." William stared at her, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. As William left the community center, the protest outside had dispersed. He sat in the back seat of his car, staring out the window. "Bradley," he said after a long silence, "why does she hate me so much?" Bradley glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Maybe because you haven't given her a reason not to." William frowned but didn't respond. For the first time in a long while, doubt began to creep into his carefully constructed world. The next morning, William arrived at the community center, this time in casual clothes that looked out of place despite his attempt to blend in. His security team stayed back at the car, and only Bradley followed him inside. Leona was already there, unloading boxes of donated supplies with a group of volunteers. When she saw William approaching, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Back so soon?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. William adjusted his cuffs awkwardly. I've been asked to immerse myself more in your community. Immerse? Leona repeated, her tone skeptical. She gestured to a stack of heavy boxes. Well, here's your chance. William hesitated before picking up a box. He struggled with its weight, the strain evident on his face. Leona watched, unimpressed. Careful, she said. We wouldn't want you breaking a sweat. In the community kitchen, William stood at the counter, chopping vegetables under Leona's supervision. His movements were clumsy, his frustration mounting as the pile of chopped carrots refused to grow. You've never done this before, have you? Leona asked, her tone more amused than critical. No, William admitted through gritted teeth. I have people for this. Leona chuckled softly. Of course you do. But today you're one of us. William glanced at her, irritated by her calm demeanor. What's that supposed to mean? Leona stopped chopping and looked at him directly. It means no one's above hard work. Not even you. As lunch service began, William was assigned to the serving line. He fumbled with the ladle as people moved through, offering him polite smiles or brief thanks. He noticed how easily Leona interacted with everyone. Her smile genuine, her tone warm. A young mother approached, her toddler clinging to her leg. She thanked Leona profusely, tears in her eyes. I don't know what we'd do without you. Leona squeezed the woman's hand. We're here for you always. William watched the exchange in silence. For the first time, he saw something he didn't understand. Respect that wasn't bought, but earned. During a break, William sat in the corner of the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. Leona sat across from him, her arms crossed. You seem uncomfortable, she observed. William glanced at her. I'm not used to this. What? Helping people? She asked, tilting her head. William frowned. You make it sound so simple. Leona leaned forward. It is simple. You just have to care. William stared at her, his expression guarded. Why do you care so much? Leona hesitated, then sighed. Because I know what it's like to feel invisible, and I won't let anyone else feel that way if I can help it. Her words lingered in the air, and for a moment, William had no response. As they left the center that evening, William and Bradley walked in silence. Bradley finally spoke, his voice hesitant but firm. Sir, you've seen what this place means to these people. You've seen what Leona does for them. William's jaw tightened. And maybe it's time to stop looking at them as problems to solve, Bradley said. They're people, just like you. William glanced at Bradley, surprised by his tone. You sound like you're on their side. Maybe I am, Bradley replied simply. The following day, Leona confronted William in the storage room, where he was stacking boxes half-heartedly. I want to know something, she said, crossing her arms. William looked up, his expression wary. What now? Why are you really here? She asked. Is it just to save face? To clean up your mess? William straightened, his tone defensive. I'm here because it's expected of me. Leona shook her head. That's not good enough. And what do you expect from me? William shot back. To suddenly become someone I'm not? I expect you to try, Leona said quietly. That's all anyone can do. Her words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. Later that evening, William found himself alone in the community center's courtyard. The noise of the city hummed faintly in the background, but the center felt like an oasis of calm. Leona appeared, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to him without a word and sat down on the bench beside him. I'm not as bad as you think I am, William said finally, breaking the silence. Leona sipped her tea, her gaze steady. I don't think you're bad. I think you're lost. William frowned. And you think you've figured me out? No, she admitted, but I think you're starting to figure yourself out. That night, William sat in his luxurious hotel suite, staring at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The events of the day replayed in his mind. Leona's unwavering confidence, the gratitude of the people she helped, and Bradley's quiet but firm words. He picked up his phone and opened a search for the community center's history. As he scrolled through photos of events and fundraisers, He saw image after image of Leona, smiling, working, and standing tall. For the first time, William felt a pang of something unfamiliar: respect. The community center was packed for the weekly town hall meeting. Local residents gathered to discuss the ongoing displacement issues caused by William Sterling's development project. The tension in the air was palpable as William sat at the front of the room beside Mr. Hargrove, the community center director. Leona stood at the podium, her posture confident as she addressed the crowd. These developments are tearing apart our neighborhood. Families are losing their homes, their livelihoods. And what's being offered in return? High-rises none of us can afford. The crowd murmured in agreement, their frustration evident. William's expression remained impassive, though his clenched fists betrayed his discomfort. Leona turned to face him directly. "Mr. Sterling, you're here today claiming to want to help. So, tell us, what do you intend to do to fix the harm you've caused?" All eyes turned to William. He cleared his throat and adjusted his tie, his voice measured. "I understand your frustrations, but these developments are meant to improve the city as a whole." Leona stepped closer, her voice sharp. "Improve for whom? The people you've displaced? Or just for those who can afford to live in the towers you're building?" The room erupted into applause, and William's composed facade cracked. For the first time, he seemed unsure of how to respond. After the meeting, William found Leona in the hallway, packing up leftover flyers. "You didn't have to humiliate me like that," he said, his tone clipped. Leona glanced at him, unimpressed. "That wasn't humiliation. That was the truth." William stepped closer, his frustration evident. "You think you know me? You think I don't care about what happens here?" Leona set down the flyers and met his gaze. "Caring isn't what you say. It's what you do. And right now, all you've done is show up because you're in trouble." William opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, at a loss for words. Leona sighed. "If you really care, prove it." The following day, Leona arrived at the community center to find a large delivery truck parked outside. A group of workers unloaded crates of fresh produce, cleaning supplies, and school materials. Maria rushed over, holding a clipboard. "Did you know about this?" Leona shook her head. "No. What's going on?" One of the workers handed her a note. She opened it, recognizing the neat handwriting immediately. "For the community. A start. William Sterling." Leona frowned, unsure of what to make of it. "A start," she muttered under her breath. "We'll see." William returned to the center that evening to check on the progress of his donation. He found Leona sorting through supplies, her expression thoughtful. "I see you got the delivery," he said, his tone hesitant. Leona glanced at him. "I did. Thank you." He raised an eyebrow. "No scathing remarks? No lecture?" Leona smirked. "Don't get ahead of yourself. One donation doesn't undo the damage you've caused." William nodded, his expression somber. "I know that, but it's a start." Leona studied him for a moment before nodding. "It is." That night, Leona invited William to join the volunteers for dinner at the center. It was a simple meal: spaghetti, salad, and garlic bread. But the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. William sat at the table, feeling out of place as the others chatted easily around him. Leona noticed his discomfort and passed him the bowl of salad. "You're not used to this, are you?" she asked quietly. William shook his head. "Not really." Leona smiled faintly. "Then consider it part of your education." As the meal went on, William found himself relaxing. He listened to the volunteers share their stories and even laughed at a joke Maria made. For the first time, he began to see the community as individuals, not just statistics. After dinner, William and Leona stayed behind to clean up. As they worked side by side, William spoke hesitantly. "I grew up in a world where success was everything," he said. "My father drilled it into me that weakness was unacceptable." Leona paused, looking at him curiously. "And you think caring about people makes you weak?" William shrugged. "It's complicated. I guess I've always seen it that way." Leona set down the dish she was drying. "Caring doesn't make you weak, William. It makes you human." Her words lingered in the air, and for the first time, William felt a crack in the walls he had built around himself. The next morning, news broke that a rival company was exploiting the same community William was working with, offering payouts to buy land at unfair prices. The media swarmed the center, seeking statements from the residents and volunteers. Leona watched as William arrived, his face grim. He stepped forward, addressing the press with uncharacteristic passion. "This community has been through enough," he said firmly. "Sterling Industries will not allow anyone to exploit them further. We will protect their homes and livelihoods." Leona watched from the sidelines, surprised by his sincerity. For the first time, she saw a glimpse of the man he could be. That evening, William approached Leona as she packed up for the day. He handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked, opening it. "It's a proposal," William said, "for a partnership. Sterling Industries will work with your community to create affordable housing and protect the businesses here." Leona looked up at him, her eyes narrowing. "Why the change of heart?" William hesitated, then said quietly, "Because I've been wrong about a lot of things, and I want to make it right." Leona studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I'll think about it." As he walked away, a small smile played on her lips. For the first time, she believed he might be capable of change. The morning air was crisp as Leona unlocked the doors to the community center. She found William already waiting outside, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. "You're early," Leona said, raising an eyebrow. "I wanted to get a head start," William replied, his tone softer than usual. "I thought I'd help with the morning setup." Leona hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but don't expect special treatment." They worked side by side, arranging chairs for a workshop on financial literacy. William asked questions about the program, listening intently as Leona explained how it helped families manage their resources. "Why haven't larger companies supported this before?" William asked, frowning. "Because they don't see the value in it," Leona replied. "To them, it's not profitable." William nodded slowly, her words sinking in. Maybe it's time to change that. Later that day, Leona offered to take William on a walk through the neighborhood. She wanted him to see the community beyond the walls of the center. They passed small businesses, a playground where children laughed and played, and rows of houses with colorful flower beds. At each stop, Leona introduced William to the people who lived there. "This is Mrs. Vega," Leona said, gesturing to an elderly woman tending her garden. "She's lived here for 40 years. Your project almost forced her to leave." William greeted Mrs. Vega, his tone respectful. "I'm sorry for the destruction we caused." Mrs. Vega smiled faintly but didn't say much. As they continued walking, William noticed the pride and resilience in the community's spirit. It was a stark contrast to his perception of them as nameless faces on a spreadsheet. That evening, news broke that the rival development company had purchased several properties in the area, offering residents immediate payouts but no long-term support. The community was in an uproar, and Leona gathered a group at the center to discuss their next steps. William attended the meeting, standing in the back as residents voiced their concerns. "They're offering money now," one man said, "but what happens when the money's gone? Where will we live?" Leona stood at the front, her voice firm. "We have to stand together. If we sell out, we lose everything." William stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Sterling Industries will offer financial assistance to anyone affected by this. We'll also provide legal support to ensure no one is forced out of their homes." The room fell silent, then erupted into murmurs of surprise. Leona glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Are you serious?" she asked after the meeting ended. William nodded. "I'm serious. This isn't about PR anymore. It's the right thing to do." As the volunteers cleaned up the meeting room, William found Leona sitting alone at a table, her hands clasped together. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting down across from her. Leona sighed. "It's just a lot. This neighborhood has been my whole life. Watching it be torn apart is heartbreaking." William hesitated, then said quietly, "I didn't realize how much this community meant to you." "It's not just me," Leona replied. "It's everyone here. They've built something special, and I won't let it be taken away." William reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before resting gently on hers. "You're not alone in this." Leona met his gaze, surprised by the sincerity in his eyes. "We'll see." The next morning, the financial literacy workshop began, with William serving as a guest speaker. He was nervous, unaccustomed to addressing such a diverse and intimate audience. Leona introduced him, her tone neutral. "Mr. Sterling has experience with finance. He's here to share some tips." The room chuckled softly, easing the tension. William cleared his throat and began to speak, explaining budgeting, saving, and investing in simple terms. As the session went on, he started to relax, answering questions and even cracking a joke or two. By the end, the participants applauded politely. Afterward, Leona approached him. "Not bad," she admitted. "You might have a future in community service." William smirked. "High praise coming from you." That evening, Leona and William stayed behind to clean up after the workshop. As they worked, they began to talk more freely. "What about you?" William asked. "What brought you to the community center?" Leona hesitated, then said, "I grew up here. My mom used to bring me to the center for after-school programs. When she passed, this place became my second home." William's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." Leona shrugged, her voice steady. "It's been years, but that's why I'm so protective of this place. It's not just a building, it's a lifeline." William nodded, his respect for her growing. "You've done more for this community than I ever could." "Then do what you can," Leona said simply. As William's support for the community became public, he faced backlash from his board and investors. At a heated meeting, one board member slammed their fist on the table. "You're throwing money away for a project that's already failing," the man shouted. William remained calm. "I'm investing in people, not just property. This community is worth saving." The board threatened to pull funding, but William held his ground. "If we abandon them now, Sterling Industries will lose more than money. We'll lose credibility." After the meeting, Bradley approached him. "You handled that well, sir." William sighed. "Let's hope it's enough." Back at the community center, William joined Leona in preparing for another event. As they worked, he spoke quietly. "I'm starting to see what you mean," he said, "about caring. It's harder than I thought." Leona smiled faintly. "It's not easy, but it's worth it." They fell into a comfortable silence, the bond between them growing stronger. For the first time, William felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. It was early morning at the community center when Leona arrived, her hair tied back and her sleeves rolled up for another busy day. To her surprise, she found William already there, waiting for her with a folder in hand. "What's this?" she asked, setting down her bat. "Plans," William said simply, handing her the folder. "For affordable housing. I've been working with some architects and urban planners who specialize in sustainable communities." Leona opened the folder, her eyes scanning the detailed blueprints and financial breakdowns. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. This is actually good." William smirked faintly. "I aim to please." Leona closed the folder, her voice soft but firm. "Why are you doing this?" William hesitated before replying. "Because I want to make things right, and because you showed me that I could do better." For the first time, Leona's guarded demeanor softened. "We'll see if you mean it." Just as things seemed to be improving, news broke that Sterling Industries' rival company had fast-tracked its development project, securing permits through questionable means. The community was in an uproar, and the center became a hub of frustrated residents looking for answers. William arrived during the chaos, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. He approached Leona, who was trying to calm a group of residents. "They're exploiting loopholes," William said grimly. "I have lawyers working on it, but it'll take time." "We don't have time," Leona shot back. "Every day they move forward, more families are at risk." William's jaw tightened. "I'll figure something out." "You'd better," Leona said, her tone sharper than she intended, "because this community can't survive more broken promises." In response to the rival company's actions, Leona and William worked together to organize a rally. They wanted to bring attention to the injustice and pressure local officials to intervene. The day of the rally was electric with energy. Residents held signs reading, "Save our homes," and "People over profit." Speeches were given by local leaders, including Leona, who stood at the podium with her usual fiery resolve. "This is not just a fight for our homes," she said, her voice carrying through the crowd. "This is a fight for our dignity, for our right to exist in a city that wants to erase us." The crowd cheered, their voices echoing in solidarity. Then William stepped up to the microphone, visibly nervous. "I know I'm not the person you expected to stand here today," he began, "but I've seen firsthand what this community is capable of, and I believe in it. Sterling Industries is committed to standing with you against this injustice." His speech was met with mixed reactions, but as the rally continued, the tension began to ease. Slowly, the community started to see William as more than just a billionaire outsider. After the rally, William and Leona found a quiet spot in the park to talk. The air was cool, the sound of the rally fading into the distance. "You did well today," Leona admitted, leaning against a tree. William chuckled softly. "High praise coming from you." Leona turned to him, her expression serious. "I meant it, but this fight isn't over. The rival company isn't going to back down without a fight." "I know," William said, his voice resolute, "but I'm not backing down either." They shared a moment of silence before William spoke again, his tone quieter. "Why do you keep fighting so hard?" Leona's gaze softened. "Because this community is my family, and family means everything." William nodded, her words settling deep in his mind. For the first time, he felt like he understood her, truly understood her. The following week, William called an emergency meeting with his board of directors. The opposition to his newfound values had reached a breaking point, with investors threatening to pull out. "This project is draining resources we could use elsewhere," one board member argued. "Why are we prioritizing this community?" William stood at the head of the table, his expression calm but firm. "Because it's the right thing to do. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're in the wrong company." The room fell silent, stunned by his defiance. Bradley smirked from his seat, clearly impressed. After the meeting, William felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had taken a stand not for profit, but for people, a decision that felt strangely liberating. The rival company escalated its efforts, attempting to force out the remaining residents through underhanded tactics. William, using his connections and resources, filed a legal injunction to halt their progress. Meanwhile, Leona worked tirelessly to support the residents, organizing food drives and temporary housing for those already displaced. The community rallied together, their unity growing stronger by the day. Late one night, William and Leona sat in the empty community center, exhausted but determined. "We're making progress," William said, looking over legal documents. "But it's going to be a long fight." Leona nodded, her voice quiet. "We'll keep going. We don't have a choice." William glanced at her, a newfound admiration in his eyes. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." Leona smiled faintly. "You're stronger than you think, too." As the days turned into weeks, William and Leona spent more time together, working side by side to protect the community. Their conversations grew deeper, moving beyond business and into personal territory. William shared stories of his lonely childhood, raised by a father who valued money over people. Leona spoke about her late mother, whose kindness and resilience had inspired her. "You've changed, you know," Leona said one evening as they locked up the center. William chuckled. "I've had a good teacher." Leona smirked. "Don't let it go to your head." Finally, after months of effort, the legal case against the rival company was won. The judge ruled in favor of the community, halting the development project and ensuring protections for the residents. The community center held a celebration, filled with laughter, music, and tears of joy. Leona and William stood at the center of it all, their partnership now a symbol of what could be achieved through collaboration and understanding. As the night wore on, William pulled Leona aside. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for showing me what really matters." Leona smiled, her voice warm. "Thank you for listening." For the first time, William felt like he truly belonged, not in a world of wealth and power, but in a community built on trust and compassion. The day after the community's legal victory, Leona arrived at the center early, expecting the usual chaos of residents and volunteers bustling about. Instead, she found it unusually quiet. A sense of calm had settled over the neighborhood, like the exhale after a long, hard battle. She walked into the main hall, where William was already sitting at one of the tables, sipping coffee. He looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, but there was still a contemplative edge to his expression. "You're up early," Leona said, setting her bag down. "I couldn't sleep," William replied. "Too much on my mind." Leona sat across from him, studying his face. "Regrets?" William shook his head. "No, but I'm realizing there's more work to do than I thought." Leona smiled faintly. "Welcome to the real world." Later that day, William returned to Sterling Industries for a board meeting. The room was tense, filled with executives who had grown increasingly frustrated with William's new priorities. "This victory for the community is commendable," one board member began, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But it's come at a significant cost to our bottom line." Another member chimed in, "We've lost investor confidence. We need to refocus on profitable ventures." William stood, his voice calm but firm. "I understand your concerns, but Sterling Industries is evolving. If you can't see the value in building trust and long-term relationships with communities, then perhaps it's time for a leadership change." The room fell silent. William's resolve was clear, and for the first time, the board began to realize that the old William Sterling was gone. Back at the community center, a small group of residents gathered to thank Leona and William for their efforts. Mrs. Vega, the elderly woman William had met during his walk, stood and addressed them. "Leona, you've always been our champion," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But now, it feels like we have another one." She turned to William, who looked genuinely humbled. "I misjudged you," Mrs. Vega continued. "You've proven that people can change." William nodded, his voice quiet. "Thank you. That means more than you know." The group erupted into applause, and Leona couldn't help but smile at the sight of William genuinely connecting with the people he once dismissed. Later that evening, Leona and William walked through the now bustling neighborhood, the streets filled with music and laughter as families celebrated. "You know," William began, his tone thoughtful, "when I first came here, I thought I was doing you all a favor." Leona chuckled. "I remember. But now," William continued, "I realize you did me the favor. You've given me something I didn't even know I needed, a sense of purpose." Leona stopped, turning to face him. "What are you going to do with it?" William looked out at the street, his expression resolute. "Keep building. Not just projects, but relationships. Trust. Real change." Leona smiled, her respect for him growing. "That's a good answer." The following week, William announced his intention to create a foundation dedicated to supporting underserved communities. He invited Leona to join the leadership team, offering her a chance to expand her work beyond the neighborhood. Leona hesitated. "I'm not sure I belong in a corporate setting." "You belong wherever you want to be," William said. "And this foundation needs someone like you, someone who truly understands what's at stake." After a long pause, Leona nodded. "I'll think about it." As William prepared to leave the neighborhood to focus on launching the foundation, he and Leona shared a quiet moment in the center's garden. The peace lily William had donated months ago was now thriving, its white blooms a symbol of growth and resilience. "I'll be back," William said, his tone light but sincere. "You're not getting rid of me that easily." Leona smirked. "Good. We'll hold you to that." They stood in silence for a moment, the bond between them unspoken but strong. Finally, William extended his hand. "Thank you, Leona, for everything." Leona shook his hand, her grip firm. "Thank you, William, for proving me wrong." Months later, the foundation was officially launched, with Leona as one of its key leaders. The first project was a partnership with the community center, funding new programs and renovating the building. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, William and Leona stood side by side as the crowd cheered. Leona spoke first, her voice strong and clear. "This isn't just a victory for our community," she said. "It's proof that when we come together, we can create real, lasting change." William followed, his tone humble. "I've learned that progress isn't about wealth or power. It's about people. And I'm grateful to this community for teaching me that."